Thanks very much for staying with us. I'm Georgia Calvin-Smith, and tonight for Eye on Africa, Human Rights Watch accuses Russian private security forces invited into Central African Republic of slaughtering civilians. Investigators say that they can't be sure that the notorious Wagner Group is involved, but does call on the government to do more to protect its people from mercenaries. Also, the family of jailed critic of the Rwandan government, Paul Rusesabagina, says that he suffered a stroke in prison. I speak to his daughter about their moves to sue Kigali over his alleged abduction and torture. And as the world marked World Press Freedom Day, we take a look at some of the continent's success stories like the Seychelles and Namibia, and elsewhere like Egypt and Eritrea, where journalists still face life-threatening risks. But first, Human Rights Watch has said that its investigators have compelling evidence that Russian paramilitary troops have been killing civilians in Central African Republic. The government called on Moscow for more help last year after a rebel offensive aimed at ousting President Faustin Archange Touadéra. Hundreds more mercenaries were sent in. It's not clear how many belong to the notorious Wagner Group, a notorious outfit that's been accused before of committing abuses in Central African Republic and in Libya. Human Rights Watch has told France 24 that it wants the Central African government to do more to protect its people from private contractors acting with impunity.
Since 2019, we've been documenting cases of abuse by Russian-linked forces. These abuses originally were cases of arbitrary detention and torture. But last year, in 2021, we documented a particularly egregious case in which between 12 and 13 men in the center of the country, north of Bosangoa, were summarily executed. In this case, these men were stopped, they were searched, they were unarmed, they were made to lay down, and they were executed. I think the big question for us at Human Rights Watch, first off, is who are these forces? We know they're Russians and we know they're Russian speaking, but we still don't know under what pretext they're actually in the Central African Republic. Are they from the Wagner Group? There are certainly reports that indicate that, but it's very difficult on the ground to actually confirm if they are indeed from the Wagner Group. Secondly, we're calling on the Central African government to launch their own investigation into the killings of its own citizens on its own soil by troops that presumably have been invited at the behest of that same government to help quell this rebellion.
There was much there from Human Rights Watch. Now, South Africa's main opposition leaders in Ukraine on a fact-finding mission. The Democratic Alliance's John Steenhuisen is on a 6-day visit to see the effects of the Russian invasion for himself. Although South Africa's president, Cyril Ramaphosa, has called for negotiations between the warring sides, he's resisted international pressure to condemn Russia outright. Steenhuisen's been criticised at home for heading to Eastern Europe, with some South Africans accusing him of neglecting conflict on his own doorstep. He said his country is already being impacted by the war in Ukraine. Nadine Therar tells us more.
Steenhuisen, the leader of the official opposition in South Africa, has become the first high-profile politician from his country to head to a diplomatic visit to Ukraine. Steenhuisen and his party, the Democratic Alliance, has taken a much stronger stance against Russia's role in the ongoing conflict than South African President Cyril Ramaphosa. Steenhuisen has said that there is irrefutable evidence that Russia's President Vladimir Putin has committed serious war crimes and that he should be held accountable for it. Steenhuisen and his party has also urged the South African government to take a more decisive stance in the raging war. Steenhuisen has accused the African National Congress of not being neutral since some of its members attended celebrations at the Russian embassy on the day the attack started. Steenhuisen arrived in the Ukrainian city of Lviv on Sunday, where he met with the mayor and the governor. On Monday, he arrived in the capital of Kiev, where he will be visiting refugee camps, war-affected areas, and meet with governors, mayors, and business leaders in the area. Steenhuisen says the purpose of the visit is to witness the devastation firsthand and to try to mitigate the impacts on South Africa. He says it's important to pressure for peace before further consequences on South Africa and Africa's food security. In previous interviews, Steenhuisen expressed his backing of NATO giving armed support to Ukraine, saying it will balance out negotiations with Russia. After a telephonic conversation with the Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky 2 weeks ago, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has reiterated his neutral stance, urging both countries to find an end to the conflict by negotiating peacefully.
Nadine Theron there for us. Now, the family of Paul Rusesabagina is suing Rwanda from the US for $400 million over his alleged abduction and torture. He was sentenced to 25 years in jail for terrorism last year, and his supporters say the trial was a sham. Rusesabagina is credited with saving over 1,000 people whilst working as a hotelier during Rwanda's 1994 genocide, and he was the subject of the Oscar-nominated film Hotel Rwanda. The now Belgian national later became a state enemy for his criticism of the Rwandan government. His family says it tricked him back from exile in Texas in order to persecute him. His daughter Karine spoke to me earlier from Washington.
My father is not doing well. He had a stroke recently in prison. That's because he's being denied his medication. He's being deprived of proper medical care. And so we are worried about his life, and we are doing everything possible to keep him alive.
So you've recently filed from the US a complaint against the Rwandan government, a civil suit for $400 million. How does that play into your plans to try and get your father freed?
Yes, so this lawsuit is to bring the weight of the U.S. justice system behind Dad and also to clear his name. Governments and human rights organizations around the world are raising their voices to call for my dad's release, and that lawsuit provides them another basis for them to continue to do so. And as you know, Kagame might have control over the press in Rwanda, he has control over the judiciary in Rwanda, but he does not control the American justice system. So we hope that the American justice system will help us clear my father's name.
So is it about the money or the pressure?
We have been using every possible avenue to pressure the Rwandan government to release my father. We want my father home, we want my father safe, and we want my father healthy, and we want him close to us. So we have filed several lawsuits around the world. Several organizations have also voiced their concern, and this is another avenue for us to continue to increase that pressure for Paul Kagame to release my father.
And do you think it will help actually attract more support to your cause from other areas?
Yes, so the American justice system is one that we trust more than the Rwandan government, than the Rwandan justice system, which is, as we know, is run and directed by Paul Kagame. However, around the world, we have received a lot of support, and just recently, the stars from Hotel Rwanda, the cast of Hotel Rwanda, also launched a campaign to help us raise awareness on my father's illegal detention in Rwanda. Don Cheadle, as well as Scarlett Johansson or Mark Ruffalo, and other stars as well from the Avengers, and NBA players and people from all walks of life are now speaking out because they're seeing this injustice, and all the voices around the world calling this out and calling on Kagame to end this will help us put pressure on him, and hopefully we'll be reunited with our father. But we are doing everything possible in the same way that he did everything possible to save over 1,268 lives during the Rwandan genocide in 1994.
Well, for World Press Freedom Day, NGO Reporters Without Borders set out the diverse landscape across the continent. While parts of Africa have seen some improvements and have ranked highly for freedom of the press, other countries have seen an increase in state-led repression, persecution, and even killings of journalists. Laura Berstecker has more.
Progressing on some fronts, regressing on others. In 2022, press freedoms have seen their ups and downs on the African continent.
Vous avez tout en haut du classement, dans le top 20 d'ailleurs, deux pays comme les Seychelles et la Namibie. D'ailleurs, c'est une première qui est deux pays dans le top 20 où la liberté de la presse est plutôt garantie. Et vous avez à l'autre extrémité des pays comme Djibouti ou l'Érythrée où il n'y a absolument aucune liberté de la presse. Les journalistes sont soit en prison, soit en exil, et il n'y a aucun média privé indépendant.
In its latest ranking, Reporters Without Borders points to a fresh wave of laws criminalizing journalism, for instance, in Mali and Benin. It also outlines the role of fake news and propaganda in undermining the credibility of journalists on the continent. And while the report does point to media opening up in some previously repressive countries, like Zimbabwe or Ethiopia, other nations known for their tolerance have also taken a step back. In Uganda, which dropped 8 places in the global rankings, NGOs are denouncing an increased repression of journalists over the past year.
We captured a total of 131 cases of abuses and violations. 63 journalists were assaulted in the line of duty. And unprecedentedly, we also had journalists arrested to a tune of 26 journalists arrested. It doesn't happen that way in Uganda.
Overall, West Africa continued to rank low for press freedoms in 2022, with Eritrea and Egypt the worst performing countries. And in North Africa, Tunisia dropped more than 20 places under the presidency of Kais Saied, yet it still ranked far above neighboring Morocco and Algeria.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.